have with us Phil Twist, VP Networks Marketing and Corporate Affairs, Nokia. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Wanted to know what's happening in 5G.
That's a very broad question that takes a long time to answer, so let me try and boil it down to some of the key aspects. The part which is most talked about is the radio, the announcement of the 5G new radio specifications, the spectrum which goes with that, the rollouts which go behind it. But actually 5G is a complete network infrastructure upgrade. It's not just the radio, it's actually the core network infrastructure which needs to become distributed. It's the smart network fabric which connects it all together. It's the 5G ready transport solutions. It's the network management and orchestration and business management solutions which need to put it all together. I mean, ultimately we're ending up with a approach that will yield something called network slicing, which gives each use case a virtualized network slice with parameters tuned to what it is that it needs to do, whether it's high bandwidth or low latency or ultra reliability or mass machine type of communications. So it really becomes a very flexible and manageable network. One of the challenges, it adds so much to the complexity that it becomes very difficult for the old operations processes to keep the network operating smoothly. You need to start using artificial intelligence with machine learning embedded in each component of the network, and then artificial intelligence algorithms to put it together. We have the view that for network slicing to be successful, you need to have zero-touch automation. You need to start having self-service, self-provisioning of the services to end users. So that's from a network infrastructure perspective, how we can see it evolving. From a use case perspective, it's likely to go through three stages. The first stage is talking about enhanced mobile broadband, more of what we know from connectivity services, but using the extra spectrum, using the faster connectivity, increasing the capacity of networks, and that's what we're seeing the early use cases they're taking advantage of with things like fixed wireless access. Beyond that, the second phase will be about the machine type of communications, the ultra reliability that comes with it. And then the third phase is where you take advantage of the infrastructure that you've put in place to have virtual reality with haptic feedback. And the type of haptic feedback we're talking about is like if you're wearing VR goggles and you're in an interactive game with somebody else in a different village, a different town, a different location. You need to have low latency so that the actions that you're performing and how you perceive them, there is a very short latency gap between the two. Otherwise, in simple terms, you get motion sickness from trying to involve in things like that. So you can have haptic feedback for using robots or drones to actually go and maintain a factory or put a robot into an unsafe building which has caught fire or something, and actually have some sense of touch and feel and temperature and senses of what comes back. So we'll start to see a whole lot of new services develop on the back of it. So it's not just the network, it's also the use cases and the business opportunities it opens up.
What should be the three steps for India to follow for 5G?
The first step is actually likely to be taking advantage of the new business opportunities and looking at how you can even use 4G for industrial automation, for public safety, for private LTE types of solutions, to build the business models that show how some of those work. The steps to bring 5G radio in place are clearly the spectrum auctions, which are likely to take place in perhaps a year from now or less than a year from now. That will be the trigger for the 5G radio deployments, but the core network infrastructure deployments can start already. The distribution of the core, the putting in place of the high bandwidth connectivity in place so that you're ready for that. And we can also start to look at some of the new types of applications that we're looking about, like education, which will come in place. We build the ecosystem, the infrastructure, ready for when the network capabilities are actually built. And we can do that by taking advantage of what we've learned from other world markets as we go through.
What are the challenges that you foresee in terms of 5G deployment?
Globally, one of the key challenges is actually the business case. That if you build 5G for one specific use case, it's not necessarily cost effective. If you build it for multiple use cases and have network slicing in place and have automation in place in the infrastructure, then you do start to see overall cost benefits. And you need the low cost, you need the automation to actually enable you to do that. So it's going to be a commercial driver for it. Ultimately, almost every network operator worldwide is a business that depends on its balance sheet. So we need to make sure that we are aware of that and have cost-effective services and solutions and business opportunities that come with it. There are other challenges, of course, with putting infrastructure in place. If you use the same footprint as for existing network infrastructure, so 3.5 gigahertz can use the same footprint as the 2.1 or 2.5 gigahertz infrastructure which has already been built, so the towers are in place. When you come to millimeter wave, it's a much smaller footprint which is required. So you actually have to have presence in the high street, on the telegraph poles, in houses and so on, which brings a whole new way of permitting and building networks that need to be looked at. So there's going to be some logistical and operational challenges. And I'm not talking about the technology challenges because I think the industry as a whole understands what those are. And through 3GPP we have a clear roadmap of what those should be. So I'm just trying to cast the net a little bit wider than just looking at the technology itself.
There are two components of 5G. One is the fixed part and the other is the mobile part. The fixed part, we are seeing few deployments in limited parts of the globe, but on the mobile part, we haven't seen any development as such. So what's your comment on this?
Well, some of the early adopters of 5G have launched with 5G radio interfaces already. So we've seen Telia do it in Helsinki as the world's first. We've seen Verizon in the US launching fixed wireless access using 5G. We're seeing large-scale deployments taking place in some of the key markets like US, Korea, Japan. It will follow through in China, in some of the Middle East states as well. So that will follow. Of course, every network depends on the backhaul, the connectivity. So of course you need fiber in place. You want the very high bandwidth towards the base station sites. You will need millimeter wave microwave. You will need high bandwidth fiber, or you'll need other communications techniques. So the fixed part of the network actually pushes wider, closer towards the edge. It sounds counterintuitive as you move to a mobile network, but there is of course the fixed heart to it. But also remember that 5G is about multiple connectivity. It's not just a 5G radio interface. You can actually add together existing 4G streams with 5G millimeter wave, with 5G mid-band, with 5G low band, with fixed access. So you blend them together to have an aggregated transport path, which is how you actually get some of the ultra reliability that comes with it, because it's a multi-path solution. So it's not like a discrete solution, it's a combination of all the different technologies for access blended together.
Thanks, Phil Twist, for talking.